There's this sense that Lucy thrived on frustration, despair, anguish, confusion, and grief. The suffering of others was exciting and fulfilling to her. She just could not get enough of that feeling. No amount of homicidal behavior could satisfy her. Lucy was drawn to care for children, not because she had compassion for them, but because she loved the intense emotions that surrounded newborns. She wasn't interested in the positive emotions like hopefulness or joy, but rather Lucy was attracted to the grief, sorrow, and despair that resulted from tragic death. Those are my thoughts in the case of Lucy Letby.
I'm not convinced. I think, again, he speaks very definitively about things that he does not know. You cannot know the machinations of someone's mind, what's happening inside their mind. You can speculate, and for a man who's constantly announcing he's only speculating, he sure draws some definitive conclusions. So that video of Grande about Lucy Letby case analyses was a year ago. I believe he's just done a new one. So I'm going to go and watch that live with you now. Okay, so I've found the most recent Todd Grande video on Lucy Letby. So this is 4 days ago and already has 104,000 views. So it's a popular video. I haven't watched it yet. I'm going to watch it live and probably pause and comment as I do that. I'll edit out a lot of this. I'm not going to do the entire video, but let's get into it.
This case has been shrouded in mystery because the court system in the UK has kept a lot of information secret. Based on what was initially released, it seemed pretty clear that Lucy was guilty. She was the only employee who was present during every single incident. It seems very unlikely that more than one nurse was involved, and the chances of unexplained medical causes being responsible for every death is unlikely. The only remaining possibility is that Lucy was the killer. The problem with this theory is that information has been released which supports the idea that the neonatal unit was not a well-run or safe place. Maybe there was no killer at all. The mortality on the unit may have been high, but that doesn't mean homicide was involved.
Now, I mentioned I haven't watched this yet, so I'm not sure where Dr. Grande is going, but just on the back of his video a year ago, where I've just watched it, and he's very certain Lucy is the killer, he starts his case analysis, his opinion here, by suggesting that the court withheld a lot of information. So based on the information he had, or we had previously, it was an open shut case. But I'm not sure where he's going. So let's see what he says now. Now that we have, I wouldn't say it's new evidence, we have 14 other medical opinions now. So they're all just opinions. And the possibility of suboptimal care, neglect, and failures in the hospital system was there before. That's not new. That was always a possibility. But let's have a look.
Is it possible that the criminal justice system misled the public into thinking this was an easy guilty verdict?
The media.
Maybe Lucy's defense was correct, and she was the victim of a conspiracy. Excess mortality was not limited only to that unit. The maternity ward also had a similar problem. The neonatal unit had a number of problems with staff, teamwork, culture, leadership, and competency. It was described as chaotic and a madhouse. A report was leaked indicating that during the time of the alleged murders, the unit where Lucy worked experienced an outbreak of a dangerous bacteria. Lucy indicated that her disturbing words on the note did not represent a confession of murder. Rather, she didn't feel good enough to do her job. Some of her messages were recorded at the direction of a counselor and were intended to be therapeutic. In February 2025, a panel of 14 medical experts determined that all the deaths and deteriorations could be explained by natural causes or substandard care. They did not find any evidence supporting deliberate harm.
I'm going to pause there because none of that was mentioned in his first video. Whilst we didn't have a lot of the information, well, we didn't have the 14 medical experts review back then, we did have the ability to think outside the box, to look at the testimony of a lot of staff, the management, the suboptimal care, the fact that the hospital was already being reviewed for their standards. So there was already speculation that things weren't operating properly within that hospital. And that would lead us to the conclusion that, is it possible that it was the suboptimal care that contributed to the deaths? Now, whilst there was a lot of surface evidence, like the note, which, on the surface is hard to ignore, that at least presents reasonable doubt. And when we are in a criminal court, it's not just a preponderance of the evidence. It's not just what you think might be happening. You have to have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And this suboptimal care, the problems that were inherent in this hospital, the fact that there were already multiple fatalities the year before Lucy was on staff, before she was present, that has to invoke reasonable doubt. So I'm not suggesting Grande was wrong in concluding that he thinks Lucy was guilty. He has every right, as much as anyone, to have an opinion on it. But he really came hard saying that this is what she was thinking, this is why she did it. She was a cold and callous killer. She had no empathy. She had no remorse. She probably had Munchausen syndrome. She was driven by guilt and shame. So he made a lot of very hard statements, some accusations that I think he should have been a bit more cautious around. Let's see where he's going now.
The prosecutor's fallacy is when a prosecutor claims that the probability of the evidence given innocence is equal to the probability of innocence given evidence. Here's what this means. When trying to determine the probability that something caused an event, all the possible causes and their corresponding probabilities need to be considered together. In the case of Lucy Letby, we can't look at just the probability of murder and nothing else. We also have to look at the probability of unexplained fatal medical conditions. Those are the two possibilities considering that death already happened. One of those explanations must be valid. Those relative probabilities must be compared to one another. Both probabilities must be in the equation.
Okay, that's exactly what I was saying. He's using technical terms here, but that's exactly what I was saying. Looking at the possibility that something else could equally be plausible. One doesn't necessarily exclude the other. But with the evidentiary standards in criminal court, you have to be pretty much certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that one theory explains it to the exclusion of the other. And I don't think it does, to be honest.
Let's say that you're an investigator assigned to solve a murder that occurred in a factory that manufactures components for chemical plants. A factory security guard found that one of the employees had been beaten to death from behind with an 18-inch pipe wrench as he was operating a hydraulic press. This is the only length pipe wrench used in the facility. On the victim's body, there was grease, which was definitely transferred from a pipe wrench. This, of course, would not necessarily be true, but for the sake of this example, I will pretend it's true. The grease must have come from a pipe wrench. Furthermore, let's assume that nobody ever loans a pipe wrench to anyone else in this facility. If an employee has a pipe wrench, then only they will use it. If an employee does not have a pipe wrench, then they will never use one. There are 100 potential suspects in the factory, but only 20 of them have access to a pipe wrench. Only 10 of those pipe wrenches have grease on them. Fellow investigators detain a suspect who had a greasy pipe wrench, believing he must have been guilty. The prosecutor's fallacy would argue that the probability of the evidence given innocence is 10% for this suspect. This is a true assertion. The employee is one of 10 people who has a greasy pipe wrench. Here is where we get into the fallacy. They go on to say that the probability that this suspect is innocent, given the evidence, is also 10%, meaning there's a 90% chance he's guilty. This, of course, is not true because we know there are 9 other people who have a greasy pipe wrench. Again, the probability of the evidence given innocence is not the same as the probability of innocence given evidence. There is a massive distinction between those two probabilities. Only the second probability, the probability that someone is innocent, is relevant to court cases. By the way, just to remove any mystery, the security guard did it. The hydraulic press operator kept insulting him by calling him a flashlight cop. Now moving back to Lucy's case, the probability of all those deaths occurring.
Okay, what he said is technically true, but he probably lost you. Good if he didn't, because I get the point that he's trying to make. But Dr. Grande loves story time, and some of his stories really...
Lucy was on shift is low, but the probability that Lucy would be a killer is also low. These are the two probabilities which must be compared to determine which cause is more likely. If there was only a 1 in 1,000 chance that all the deaths would have occurred due to unexplained medical conditions, that doesn't look too good for Lucy. However, what if the chances of her being a serial killer was 1 in 5,000? When comparing the probabilities, it's 5 times more likely the unexplained medical conditions were responsible. It's worth noting that the actual probability of a nurse being a serial killer is lower than 1 in 100,000. With all this in mind, one might expect me to come to the conclusion that Lucy is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. My opinion is actually the opposite. I believe that...
Oh, this is good. This is really interesting. I am definitely interested why you've just presented all this evidence, but yet he's going to conclude that she's still guilty. I guess he did make a video a year ago, very certain that she was guilty. It's hard to retract statements like the ones he made, but I'm curious why he thinks she's still guilty.
Lucy Letby is guilty of murder, and here's why. Just looking at the homicides alone, not even counting the attempted murders, the probability that all 7 deaths occurred randomly while Lucy was on shift is probably somewhere between 1 in 10 million and 1 in 2 trillion. Even though it's unlikely that Lucy is a serial killer,
I am not sure where he got that stat from. I haven't heard that. I don't know if he made that up, if he figured that out himself, or that came from somewhere. I'm really curious if you know where he got that from. But I believe that's not what the 14 medical experts concluded. However, I might stand corrected. But those statistics, if they were true, they would be pretty hard to argue with, although stats can be manipulated. But yeah, I have no idea where those numbers came from.
Even though I believe Lucy is guilty, I think that statistical experts should take a closer look at this case to determine the actual probabilities of each murder and attempted murder. As far as I know, that is something which has never been done, or at least those data have never been released to the public. Lucy deserves to have a defense based on accurate statistical calculations. Maybe her guilt will be affirmed, but maybe not. Lucy's key to freedom could be hidden away in the numbers. A lot of people have strong feelings about the guilt or innocence of Lucy Letby. I think the way a person feels about this case is really highly dependent on what evidence they believe is important. If a person looks at the statistical data and they put a lot of weight on that, then Lucy looks guilty. If they put a lot of weight on the potential incompetence of other members of the hospital staff, then Lucy looks innocent. It's all about what area gets that weight.
Well, my opinion is both get equal weight, that you don't bring feelings into a forensic analysis or into a courtroom. Feelings should be removed. We should be relying on facts. And I think both those facts are somewhat equally true. There was incompetence. There was gross negligence that we know that was happening at the hospital. And we also know that there was some evidence that looks like it would incriminate Lucy. So it's not just, what I'm going to focus on and go with. We have to look at it all and really try to extract what would be the most likely case. And if you can't come to a definitive conclusion, if there is doubt, well then by default, in criminal terms, in the legal sense, you cannot convict her. It's that simple, really.
What is important to an individual looking at this case? Now, this case is massive and complicated. So you have all these different experts that focus on one different area. And depending on what that area is, this affects how they feel about guilt or innocence. So there is no real consensus. There are a lot of different opinions. Again, people have strong feelings in both directions. Some people are absolutely certain she's guilty, and other people are saying things like, there's no evidence that a murder took place. Not even one murder, much less 7 murders.
And technically there is no evidence. There is nothing, like we haven't found insulin in a baby's system, that we haven't seen Lucy actually committing anything. No one saw anything. So technically there is no evidence. Everything is, in a way, circumstantial.
Sometimes a case just gets so bulky and so complex that it becomes difficult to ever find a consensus. If somebody wants to believe that she's guilty, again, I think the statistical evidence is a place that they can really look at for some comfort or some reassurance.
And statistics basically won the trial. Statistics basically are the number one reason Lucy was convicted in the first place.
There are also various ways to interpret Lucy's writings. Some people look at her statement like, I am evil, and they think, well, that's it. This was a confession. Other people see a confused and distraught worker who is facing these unexplained deaths and not feeling very competent. So again, a lot of components. A person can look at any of these, some of these, maybe just one of these, and come up with wildly different conclusions than other people. One thing is for certain, this was not a simple case. There are no easy answers when looking at the case of Lucy Letby.
Well, I definitely agree with that. It is not a simple case. It is not a straightforward case. And it's true what Dr. Grande says. Wherever you look, you're going to see something. We see that a lot in complicated and complex crimes. So that's why we have to look at a totality of the evidence. And that's why the criminal justice system has this beyond a reasonable doubt criteria, evidentiary standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. If you're going to convict someone for life, as Lucy Letby has been convicted, you want to be darn sure that you got it right. And unfortunately, there are a lot of convictions that are later found to be incorrect. What a tragic tale if we got this wrong.